Hi, my name is Andrew Phelps, and this is my project for the University of Maryland Global Campus Data 620 course in the summer semester of 2022. Today I will be talking about batting versus pitching, and whether the batting average or ERA has a greater impact on determining a team's win percentage and their overall chances to make the playoffs. I've gathered the MLB team data for the past 20 years in order to perform my analysis. First, I looked at the team's batting average. The top graph shows the average team batting average for teams that did and did not make the playoffs, while the bottom graph shows the minimum team batting average of teams that did and did not make the playoffs. The first thing that immediately stood out was how little separation there is between the two lines. In 2020, the average batting average of teams that made the playoffs was lower than teams that didn't make it. Looking at the forecast for this season, this model shows that the average team batting average for teams that made the playoffs will be .243, while the max will be .233. That's a spread of only 4%. In other words, the average team that makes the playoffs will have a batting average of about 4% more than teams that don't make the playoffs. The next slide again has two graphs. The top one shows the average team ERA for teams that did and did not make the playoffs over the last 20 seasons. The bottom graph shows the max team ERA for teams that did and did not make the playoffs. Here we can see that there is a much larger gap between the two lines in both graphs. This leads me to believe that having a lower team ERA does increase a team's chances of making the playoffs and therefore is more important than a high batting average. Looking at the forecast for this year, Tableau is projecting that teams will have an average team ERA of 3.672. Then looking at the max, this model forecasts teams with an ERA over 4.442 will not make the playoffs. That is a spread of about 17%. So, the average team that makes the playoffs will have an average ERA of about 17% lower than teams that don't make the playoffs. Next, I looked further into the impact that batting average and ERA had on a team's win-loss percentage. The graph on the left shows the correlation between a team's ERA and a team's win-loss percentage. You can see a clear negative correlation between these two variables. This means that a team with a higher ERA will have a lower win-loss percentage and vice versa. Looking at the trend line, we see an R-squared value of 0.488, which means there is a moderate predictive value in determining win-loss ratio for a team. The graph on the right shows the correlation between a team's batting average and win-loss percentage. Here the R-squared value is only 0.092, which is a very weak correlation. This shows that batting average has only a 9% predictive value of a team's win-loss percentage. Therefore, we can conclude that the strength of a team's pitching staff has more to do with the team's win-loss percentage than batting. With that in mind, let's take a look at some American League teams that I think could make the playoffs this year based on current ERA as well as the trend of their average team ERA over the last 5 years. First, I looked at the max average team ERA for teams that made the playoffs over the past 20 years. This value is about 4.3 and 4.48 when looking at the 95% confidence interval. I can say then with 95% confidence that teams with an ERA over 4.48 will not make the playoffs. This rules out the Kansas City Royals. Next, I looked at the remaining teams and I wanted to determine which teams had the best chance of making the playoffs this year. I believe the teams with the best chance are the teams with an ERA trending down over the past 5 years. This could be due to personnel or management changes at the clubs. These teams are the Chicago White Sox, the Houston Astros, the Los Angeles Angels, the Minnesota Twins, the New York Yankees, the Seattle Mariners, Tampa Bay Devil Rays, or the Toronto Blue Jays. So, thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. All stats were retrieved from baseballreference.com.